right, so let's go ahead and get started here. So thanks for joining, everybody. This is InfoTrust's webinar on common analytics pain points for publishers. So anybody that works in news and media, just media in general, publishers, we're going to go over some of the really common issues that we see with all of the implementations and support that we provide. So I'll take you through 5 of the more common issues and how to solve those. So let's go ahead and get into it. If you guys don't know me, my name is Andy Gibson. I am the head of vertical for news and media at InfoTrust. So I mainly deal with our media companies, most of them in regards to actually reselling them Google Analytics 360. But we also do a lot of other digital analytics type practices with different types of companies as well. So my main focus is news media, but we also service e-commerce / retail companies, and then also large multinational / kind of consumer product goods companies. A little bit about InfoTrust. We're based in Cincinnati, Ohio. We are a digital analytics consulting and product development company. We do a bunch of digital analytics training programs a year, both for our own customers and then also for just the community at large. And then we have other offices in Barcelona, Spain, and then also Dubai as well. One other thing, we are Google Marketing Platform certified. We also DoubleClick certified marketing partner, and we are Google Analytics 360 sales partners as well. So let's get into what we're going to talk about here today. The first thing is just a lack of consistency across different properties and brands. This is one of the more widely occurring issues, I would say. And so I'll go through some examples of what this means and how to go ahead and solve that. We'll also talk about the inability to do enterprise level reporting. This is another huge issue that we see, is that companies typically will have a bunch of different markets that they're in or countries that they're in, different properties, and they'll run into the issue where, okay, we want to see how property A in the United States is doing against property A in Russia or in the UK or something like that. A lot of times there's no possibility of actually setting that up. And so we'll talk about some potential solutions for that as well. One of the other things that we see a lot of the time is that really the analytics tools and their pricing models are expensive for high traffic organizations. So a lot of the times, like e-commerce and retail websites, CPG companies, consumer packaged goods companies, those companies and those websites aren't getting the sheer amount of traffic that a media company is doing, someone like Netflix or the New York Times or Washington Post. And so in those cases, because the pricing model is built on really kind of like this hit level billing system, the companies that have a lot of billable hits, those are the ones that are going to pay the price. And so we'll talk about some strategies for keeping those costs down, especially for those high traffic organizations like publishers. We'll also talk about the lack of insight into content's role in generating advertising revenue. This is another big one. Typically, the platforms between serving ads on your site and the actual analytics platforms don't really talk to each other. And so there's no way to really break down, a specific piece of content's contribution to advertising revenue. And so we'll talk about a couple things around that as well, and I'll show you some examples that I think will drive that home a little bit more. And then last, the inability to deliver targeted audiences to advertisers. This is another big one. The last two are going to be kind of interrelated. The solution is going to be interrelated, but we'll talk about how to build those targeted audiences using your analytics data. So let's get into the first one here, no data consistency across properties and brands. This is, I think I mentioned, this is one of the biggest issues that we will see when we're working with media companies. We'll first get started with the companies and they'll say, okay, we have, let's say 20 different properties in the US. And really none of them are on a standard architecture. We have, in the case of Google Analytics, we have 5 custom dimensions set up for half of them, and we have 25 custom dimensions set up for the other half. There is a lot of differences in the actual data that's being collected. So in terms of formatting that data, in terms of where that data is being sent, there is just a ton of kind of mismanagement of those disparate pieces. And so this is really one of the biggest issues that we run into, is starting a relationship with a publisher is really trying to get a handle on these different types of inconsistencies that are going to be almost inherent to starting to work with a publisher. So when you think about it, you might have different properties or brands or markets in terms of US, UK, Canada, something like that. All of them are collecting different data points. Those data points are going to have inconsistent values, formatting, the spelling, the English spelling of words is a little bit different than, or the American English version is a little bit different than the UK version. So there's going to be a lot of differences with that. And so we'll talk about some of this. The issues with data consistency typically happen for a few reasons. One is going to be that each of the countries or the markets or the brands, they're actually operating independently from one another. So an example of one of the big publishers that we work with, we mainly work with their US team. That's really where they're headquartered out of. But then their UK team, their Germany team, their Nordics region team, all of those actually work independently of one another. They all have their own budgets. They all work with their own partners. And so in those cases, when we've rolled out a global architecture across everybody, we've had to work with each of those individual markets to really better understand what data is being collected, the differences between the markets, and kind of work through that. So we'll talk about a few ways to kind of solve this here coming up. Another one is employee turnover is just causing those implementations to change over time, especially in kind of the technical world. When it comes to developers, there's a pretty high turnover, meaning that employees are coming and going at a pretty rapid clip. So, in the relationships that we have with our clients, we'll typically see every 6 to 12 months, there's new developers that are being added, or new developers that or old developers that are leaving the company. And so every single time that happens, you have somebody else coming in and doing something their own way. If you don't have standardized processes around what needs to be collected, how that information should be collected, what that information should look like, there's going to be a lot of issues in terms of inconsistencies. And then last is you're actually just using different analytics platforms altogether. So in the example I was talking about with one of our clients that has a US team, a UK team, a Germany team, the US team was actually using Adobe, the UK and the Germany team are using GA. And so when we actually migrated the US team over from Adobe to Google Analytics 360, we then took that learning and that kind of global architecture across the seas, so to say, to the UK team to actually implement. So there are a lot of different issues or different reasons as to why this inconsistency can happen. These are more of the general reasons that we see, but a lot of these things can be alleviated. Those issues can be alleviated if you are working closely with a partner that can help you kind of document everything and keep you up to certain standards. So let's review a few examples of inconsistent data collection. I just want to kind of drive this home, what I mean by there is kind of a lack of consistency. And so in this case, we'll just say it's called Publisher A. This is going to be an example. So maybe we have a website, and I just made this up, mypcreviews.com. We have a US version, and then we have a UK version. This example is coming strictly from Google Analytics, but the example could be Adobe, it could be Web Trends, really any of the other tools. Really the differences in the data points being collected, that's all you need to focus on here. So let's say this is a similar article that's being published in the US versus on the UK site. It might be on top PCs in 2008, something like that, or 2018, excuse me. In this example, you can see for our US version of the site, we're collecting 10 custom mentions or just 10 custom data points. The first one's author, second one's content category, content subcategory, ID, content type, tags, article has video, date published, date updated, premium content. These are the data points that we're collecting custom to send over to Google Analytics to use this information for reporting, for analysis, or for optimization. And so this looks all well and good, but then, we're looking at the UK team and we're looking at what they're collecting, and it's completely different or partly different. So you can see for the UK team, they're collecting for their first custom dimension, the version of the CMS being used. They have the same concept of content category and content subcategory, but some different values possibly, and then some other things. So let's take a walk through this. So for mypcreviews.com, for the US site, we see the author, we're collecting an author, but for the UK team, we're not collecting an author. So if we're trying to understand what authors are really driving page views or advertising revenue, it's just not possible right now for the UK team. They're not collecting author. That's something that we need to make a note about. We can see that we are collecting a content category and content subcategory across both markets, and they're in the same kind of custom data point slot. The issue is in how those are being categorized. So the US team is capturing a content category of PC and then a subcategory of laptops, whereas the UK team, the content category, they're calling it reviews, and then the content subcategory they're saying is PC, which is really kind of being mapped to the content category in the US side of things. So some different differences there. We can't really just pull that information together because now we're going to get PC for content category for the US and reviews for content category for the UK. That's not helpful. Those are two different, essentially, values. Now for content ID, they might have a different content ID format. Obviously we're not going to have the same exact content ID because it's two different websites, but maybe they're using an alphanumeric number, and what we're using is just strictly an integer, a number of some sort. So a lot of differences there. Let's see, content type. So in this example, we are calling out that it's a review for the US team. The UK team is just saying it's an article. So their review is actually being sent to the content category, whereas the content type for the US is being set to review. So certainly some differences here. Article has video, so both of the markets have this. Different slots, not a huge deal, but the US team is setting that value to no. The UK team is using a Boolean for false. Not really that helpful. Definitely can change that, but there are some inconsistencies there. And then for date published, just the overall format. So the US team is capturing year, month, date, and the UK team is collecting an actual timestamp. So it's timestamped, a computer timestamp in GMT format here. So a lot of different kind of inconsistencies across this. If I'm tasked with pulling together, as an analyst, pulling together a report that shows the top performing content across the US and UK markets, that's not really going to be entirely possible. If my boss says, okay, hey, I want to see the top author across the US and UK team, or websites, excuse me, that's not possible. We're not collecting author in the UK. Or we want to see the top performing content categories. Okay, well, we're considering content category as more or less like the top level category of the article, whereas the UK team is actually using some type of really content, the type of content as the kind of top level content category here. So that's not a one-to-one relationship. They're not exactly the same. We're not comparing apples to apples. So it's really not going to be, I can't go back to my boss and say, okay, here's the answers for these things. It's not possible. We're not collecting a lot of this data, or if we are, it's not a one-to-one relationship as it should be. So ideally, this is what we want to look at. We want to look at something like this. So we have the same kind of really mapping from the content management system over to our analytics tool. So we're collecting author in the first slot, the content category and subcategory. If this is the same type of article, these should ideally match. We have PC as kind of the high level category. Maybe the subcategory is laptops, or it's the other way around, laptops and PC. But we have that worked out, so it's mapped correctly across both of those markets. My boss says, hey, show me the top content categories across US and UK. Easy. Look at custom dimension number 2. Very easy. Pull that out. Got it. Same idea for ID, for content type. We're really coming up with a standardized value that can be pushed in for these different types of things. Standard format for article has video, so we're going to use yes or no. We're not going to use a Boolean true or false. date published, date updated, we're using the year, month, date format. Now it's very easy to pull that information, and then same thing with the premium content, we have that standardized. This is essentially what we want to see across all of the different markets. A lot of the times we don't see this, and this is what eventually we want to get to. So this is perfect. This is exactly what we want to look at. If you think about the big publishers that we work with, they're not just collecting 10 kind of custom data points, they're collecting 60, 70, 80, 100. And so you can see where that gets even more complicated because, we have just that many differences in the data points. So this is ideally what we want to get to. This is generally the biggest issue that we run into, is that we just can't get to this at the very beginning. This is something we have to work towards. So really the solution here is creating this, what we call a standardized global architecture. So when we're talking about architecture, what are we talking about? We're talking about the actual data, the data architecture that's going to be collected and then sent over to our analytics tool. So in this case, this coincides with a lot of other things. So, user interactions, this would be part of the global architecture. In this example, I'm just showing you the actual custom dimensions that we would be collecting. But essentially, this is what would get us on the same page. So now we can go to the US team and say, okay, these are the 10 custom dimensions, or 70 or 80 or however many we have. And these are the standard indexes that they need to go into. These are the names that we need to collect those within the data layer. These are some of the example values and how those should be formatted. And then we also work with them to understand, okay, in your content management system, your CMS, what does this actually map to? So in this case, this is what a lot of the work is trying to figure out with both teams, okay, for content ID, let's say, for instance, the US team, their field mapping in the CMS is just called content ID. They set that, or it's automatically generated. Whereas in the UK, it's called article_ID. So similar, but not the same. So we need to make sure that we can get on the same page and map these together so that, we're really having that one-to-one relationship for that specific dimension. And so in this case, we can take this and send this to the US team. Okay, what you guys need to do is map the CMS field author to the data layer. We'll grab that information and send it to GA as the custom dimension index 1, and so on. So this way we're on the same page with both of those markets. But also we have this standardized architecture that, let's say we want to work with Germany later, or Sweden, or whoever. We take this to them and say, okay, we'll just add another line here for CMS field mappings. But the rest of this is the standardized structure that we need you to put this data into. This is what's going to be collected. Everybody's going to be on the same page. We have all the same custom dimensions, and now we can pull this kind of globally. The next issue that we see is just a lack of ability to do enterprise level reporting across different properties and brands. So this one is a little bit interrelated with the first one. Obviously, if you're having data inconsistency issues, the first thing you're going to want to do is go through that process that we discussed of creating that global architecture to make sure at least everyone's on the same page. We're collecting the same data points across the same markets, or across the different markets, that we can then kind of aggregate that data and look at it at a high level or at an enterprise level. A few questions that I want to ask you. Do you currently have a dashboard that shows you the top performing properties, the top performing markets, platforms, brands across your organization? Is this something that is currently possible right now? Are you able to also see the content performance broken down by common dimensions like content category or content type, author, tags or keywords, really across those properties and markets, those platforms and those brands? Is that possible for you right now? If not, then you probably have a very similar issue that you're just not able to do this type of enterprise level reporting. The reason this is so important, this enterprise level reporting, is because when it comes time for, and this is happening all the time in the publishing industry, there's a lot of acquisitions, there's a lot of sales of different properties. We work with a local publisher that owns a lot of TV stations and radio stations across the US. They're constantly selling their properties, their stations to other media companies, and so there's a lot of turnover with that. One of the most important things to be able to do is to understand how your properties are performing at any given time. If we have a property that's severely underperforming in a certain market, we want to be able to raise that to management and show that, okay, we're having issues here, or this property is just not doing it, or we have this really high performer here. Let's add some more content to it. Let's actively market a little bit more. There are a lot of different reasons why you want to do this enterprise level reporting, but we see typically a lot of this is kind of done manually. It's not really all that helpful to go in and check 300 different properties and say, okay, here are the top 5 performers. You need some type of enterprise level reporting that you can look at in an instant and know, okay, here are our top 5 markets or our properties or our brands in terms of page views, in terms of advertising revenue, etc. That's really important nowadays. So really the solution here, this solution is a bit GA specific, but it's also a solution that you can use through someone like Adobe as well. With Google Analytics 360, there is what's called a Rollup property. And a Rollup property is basically a tagless option that will allow you to essentially roll up all of your properties into this Rollup property. It'll basically show you within GA, within the interface, how all of your properties are performing at once. When I say tagless, I basically mean there's no need to set up an additional tag on any of these sites. It can just be done strictly through the interface. So whatever you have set up currently in terms of architecture on your site, none of that needs to change. All the setup is done through GA360's interface. This is a GA360 only feature, but once you set this up, once you have GA360, once you set up Rollup properties, then it's very easy to connect that to something like Tableau, Google Data Studio, Domo, etc., to be able to really build more advanced visualizations, but also just to really understand at a high level how everything's performing. So for the most part, some of that's able to do through GA360, just in the interface understanding, kind of that enterprise performance, but you really add some more features and some more functionality if you pull that out into something like Tableau or Data Studio. Now, if you're using something like Adobe, you can certainly do a very similar thing. There's no concept of kind of like a GA360 Rollup property. I believe it's gonna, I'm actually not 100% sure now I think about it. It might be possible to do it tagless, but this is definitely a possibility with Adobe. We don't really specialize in Adobe, so I don't do too much consulting around that. But this is certainly a option in Adobe as well. So really, it's just creating this type of Rollup property that you can view at a glance and say, okay, here's our 5 top performing properties in terms of page views, in terms of sessions, in terms of users, in terms of engagement, in terms of publisher revenue. All of those things are possible if you set up something like this in GA, in Adobe, and wherever. So let me walk you through a couple examples of what we set up in the past. And so the first example here, this is just a high level example for, I think this is 13 or 14 US sites. So this is just showing you across the enterprise, what are we looking at in terms of sessions, users, page views, and then what are our top channels, device usage, what are the top pages across all these different types of websites. That's certainly possible to set up with Data Studio. It gives you a very quick glance. Okay, where are we total in aggregate across our business? And then you can really dive down into, what are the top articles, what are the top authors, et cetera, across all these different properties. We can even build this out to show just the top properties in terms of, okay, property A versus property B versus property C. So there's a lot of different possibilities here. It really comes down to, what does your boss, what does your management team want to look at on a regular basis? But through a Rollup property, all of this is definitely possible. The next pain point that I wanted to talk about is just the actual expense of running an enterprise level tool for high traffic organizations. We run into this pretty much with every single publisher we work with because of the sheer amount of traffic. Generally, the Google Analytics 360 clients that we have in e-commerce or retail or CPG, they don't get anywhere close to the amount of traffic that some of these publishing organizations that we work with do. And so the actual pricing, the pricing model is just going to be just so much higher for these publishers due to that there are a lot of concerns that we hear that it's just too expensive. You know, we're sending 5 billion hits a month to Google Analytics 360. This is just, we can't continue to do this. So there are a lot of reasons for this, and we'll talk about some of these. I'll give you some examples as well, but this is certainly a major pain point with publishing organizations. So we talked about this first bullet point here. The pricing model is mainly based on total hits. So any page views that you're sending, events or user interactions, all those cost you money, essentially. Those add up. If you have 50 properties, if you have 100 properties, you know, obviously that's going to add up even faster. So certainly an issue that we see. Talked about this too. E-commerce and retailers, brands, they're not generating the sheer amount of daily and monthly traffic volumes that publishers are generating. So let's take an example here. TBS, Turner Broadcasting System. I just took a look at some data trying to get a better picture of you know, how many properties, how many hits they might be sending. Their major property is CNN, and CNN's estimated at about 854 million monthly page views just in the US. So CNN has different versions of their website for different countries and languages. Just in the United States, they almost have 1 billion in terms of just page views. When you think about tracking user engagement, so they have a ton of videos on their site, they have content that might be shared, all of those things. If you want to track that, that's additional hits that are going to go towards that. And so for TBS, just CNN, just the US version, they're almost at 1 billion already, and that's without tracking any user interactions. TBS also owns Bleacher Report. So Bleacher Report's been estimated at around 1 billion monthly page views. So again, now they're close to about 2 billion with just the US version of CNN and with Bleacher Report. And that's not even tracking user interaction. So TBS owns a bunch of other properties and platforms. I think they own HLN. HLN has a website. They own TBS and TNT. Those all have websites. So you can see if you're tracking this at a high level, this is going to be pretty substantial. Both CNN and Bleacher Report also have mobile apps. So they have mobile apps on iOS, mobile apps on Android, and then they also have apps on over-the-top platforms like Roku TV, Apple TV. So those are streaming platforms. That's a lot of stuff to track. That's a lot of hits. And so for someone like Turner Broadcasting Systems, obviously they have a lot of money, but that's a substantial hit to your budget. And so let's talk about some ways to kind of become more efficient with this. So when it comes to user engagement, you know, we'll use the example for CNN, you know, standard page view or screen view tracking, yeah, that's by default, we're tracking that, good to go there. But they also want to track user engagement with videos. So they want to track when people are, you know, playing a video, pausing, the percentage they've watched. If it's a live stream, like on one of the over-the-top platforms like Roku TV, they might send data every 15 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute for how long someone has watched on the live stream. All of that is requiring hits to track. And so that's all going to add up pretty quickly. Same thing with article engagement. Maybe they want to track the scroll depth on an article to see, you know, are people actually reading this article, or are they, you know, opening it up and just moving on. Social sharing aspects, external links within the articles, you know, if you want to track that, all additional hits that are going to be billed to you at the end of the month. CNN has slideshows and galleries, so some of those, if they're wanting to track the interactions with those galleries or slideshows, you know, going from one image to the next, how many images are people viewing when they open up a slideshow, that all requires hits to track. So this is just some very high level things that I would recommend tracking on CNN, but you can see we talked about they're almost at 1 billion hits a month just by tracking page views. Now think about tracking video, article, and slideshows across all their other platforms, mobile apps, over-the-top apps. You can see that's a significant amount of hits. And so what are some ways that we can kind of alleviate this concern? One is just to get a better plan around what to track. So how many people that are on the webinar here, and just think out loud to yourself, Have you ever heard somebody say this before? Let's just track everything now and we'll figure out what data we need later. If I had 10 cents for every single time I heard this, I'd probably be, I don't know, $10 richer. I hear this a lot. This is something that people don't want to do the work up front to figure out what data points are needed. They want to think of analytics as something after the fact. We built this new website. Yeah, just put the standard tracking on it and then, track all the clicks on the site or track every button click or something like that. Once we get data in GA or once we get data in Adobe, we'll figure out what we need and then remove the tracking and whatever. This is not the way to do that. Let's not do that. Really, what you want to do is work on a measurement and tracking plan that is done prior to setting up this tracking on the site. It really doesn't make sense to start tracking things without knowing whether or not it should be tracked. Especially for publishing sites, if you try to track everything, you're going to be getting $1 million bills every single month because you're just tracking everything. Every single hit you send costs money. You have a lot of traffic. It's going to be a dangerous road there. Especially with media companies, it's really important to create a measurement plan to understand what are the KPIs, what are the business objectives that we need to be able to track, and then build that into a tracking plan that says, okay, development team, go out and set up all this tracking across all of our different platforms. So really the first thing you need to do is identify what is important to measure on your platform, and that's really what a measurement plan is. It's just a document that is going to translate your business objectives into metrics, dimensions, and engagement that need to be tracked across those platforms. And this is really priority number one. This is something that you need to absolutely focus on because at the end of the day, these business objectives that your boss has given you or your management team has given you, you need to be able to measure those on the website. So when it comes to, we think of the New York Times, they have a subscription model. Your boss is going to be asking, or your management team is going to be asking, how many subscriptions do we get this month? How many subscriptions are we averaging a day? What is the average order value for a subscription? All that information, if you're not tracking that, you're fired. So you need to work with your team, and typically this is going to be the people above you, to understand, okay, what are your business objectives? What are our company business objectives? Obviously, if one of those is, we want to grow our subscription base by 10%, then you need to know, you need to track subscriptions on the website and send that data into your analytics platform so you can measure that and then report that information out. Now, additionally, there are going to be other types of engagements you want to track but aren't going to be tied directly to business objectives. But ultimately, those are still important to track. So this would be things like video engagement, slideshow engagement, scrolling, all those things that are going to give you a better idea of how users are interacting with the site, how users are engaging with the site, what content is really resonating with the audience. That information, you can still collect that stuff. It's important to understand, but it's not going to be easily tied to a specific business objective. Your business objective typically for your company isn't going to be, we want to increase the number of people that view a slideshow. It's going to be something like, we want to increase ad revenue, subscriptions, something like that. Those can all be tied kind of indirectly to that business objective, but really when it comes to measuring that, it's still important to understand, are we getting any engagement from our slideshows, or should we just remove these altogether from the site? They're not helpful. So there are going to be some things additionally that you want to track that are important to track, but not going to be essentially part of that kind of measurement plan for just the key KPIs and business objectives. That's going to be your priority 2. So priority 1, definitely need to get that on the site immediately. Priority 2 is something generally that you can work on once you get priority 1 done. We'll track those good to haves or those nice to haves or those we need to have, but it's not something that we're going to report back to management on a regular basis. And then your tracking plan is really just going to translate the measurement plan, so everything that needs to be tracked through the measurement plan with those additional kind of priority 2 items into specifications that you can send over to your development team, your IT team, to implement on your sites and your apps, so that everything that you need is going to be tracked. The data is going to be sent to your analytics tool where you can create reports in the tool. You can pull that out into some other type of platform, data visualization tool, Tableau, Data Studio, any of those, and now you're all set. So by creating a measurement plan and tracking plan, you're also helping with just the sheer amount of hits that you're sending. One is, like we were talking about, you're not tracking everything. You're not just tracking everything and sending, 5 billion hits a month because you just don't know what to track. Instead of 5 billion hits, we might be sending 1 billion because we've identified only the most important things that we need to track. Sure, 1 billion is a lot, but it's 4 billion less than 5. So there are some important steps that need to happen before you just say, here's what needs to be tracked and let's just track everything we can. That's not a great option. Save yourself some money, go through the process of creating a measurement plan. Based off of that, create your tracking plan, send that over to developers, and now you have everything you need and nothing you don't. The next thing, oh, I forgot to mention this. I have a link in here, so when we send out the PDF version of this, that web and app measurement at the very bottom, that's a link. I have a webinar I've done in the past where I explain both the measurement plan and the tracking plan. So if you have more questions on that, definitely check that out. That'll help you get a better idea on what those are and how those work. The next section I want to talk about is just tracking efficiently. So we've talked about some different things you can track: video engagement, article engagement, those types of things. There's certainly efficient ways to do that and inefficient ways to do that. So let's take a look at this. This example, we get our boss that says, we want to understand video engagement on the site. Okay, cool. Here's what we want to track. We want to track if someone's played a video, if someone's paused a video, and how long someone's watched a video. Okay, let's do that with quartiles. Okay, we'll track, the percentage, the quartile that someone's watched a video. In this case, let's look at this. So we track the video play, that happens first. Video pause, someone pauses it. We're at 2 hits so far. Video watched, 25%. Video watched, 50%, 75%, 100%. That's 6 hits. We're sending 6 hits. This is just one video, one user watching one video. Not that efficient. The best way we could do this is, let's go ahead and say we're only going to send the last quartile watched. So in this case, we've cut our total hits in half by only tracking the play and pause button and then the last quartile, last percentage that somebody made it to. So in this case, it just understood that 25%, 75%, 50%, those quartiles have all been hit because the person has reached 100% watched. So in this very simple example, you can see we've cut our hits down 50%. We're collecting 3 instead of 6. Think about this across, millions of users across millions of videos. That's going to be a huge efficiency boost to what you're tracking. To drive this home, let's talk about one more example here for scroll tracking. So with scroll tracking, really the point of scroll tracking is just to understand how far down on an article people are making it, which will help you better understand if people are actually reading the article or if people are just landing on the article and moving on. So in this case, very similar to the video tracking, we're just going to track the quartiles scrolled. So we have our page view, which goes through, tells us the person has landed on the page, and then we're tracking 25% of scroll, 50, 75, and 100%. 5 total hits. Not that great, not that efficient. In this case, we're going to do the very same thing we did with the video tracking. We're only going to send the last quartile that was seen, that was scrolled, which is going to be that 100%. So again, 25, 50, and 75%, those are understood. We know those people have hit that because they made it to 100%. In this case, we've reduced the hits by 60%, sending 2 instead of 5. So there are a lot of different ways that we can get around kind of these hit concerns by just tracking these engagements more efficiently. So this is certainly something that would be worked out through the tracking plan. So ideally, these examples, these efficiency kind of updates, these would be a part of that tracking plan that you're sending over to the development team. You're saying, okay, it is possible to track all 4 quartiles. Here's what we're going to do. We're only going to track the last quartile scrolled. So you need to essentially do this, this, and this, save that, send it, whatever those directions are. But this way you are keeping in mind that billable hit count ahead of time, and you're not, the first month hitting 10 billion and saying, oh crap, we were budgeted for this specific amount. We just tripled it because we're collecting everything. That's definitely a concern and definitely a reason for going through these kind of efficiency exercises, making sure that you're collecting everything you need, but also you're tracking it as efficient as possible. The next section here, these last two sections are kind of intertwined. The next section is not having any insight into your actual content's performance, its role in generating advertising revenue. So what do I mean when I say that? A couple questions, if you are understanding that, you can answer these questions, but can you calculate the revenue of each individual piece of content on your website? I would venture to guess most people are going to say no. They're going to say, you know, we're using DFP, double-click for publishers, which is now called Google Ad Manager. We're using that, and we can see, you know, aggregate numbers like, you know, we're getting $5 million a day from all of our advertising revenue. We have that information. We can break it down by maybe section. So I can see for any of our, you know, our weather section, we have DFP tags on there. We can break it out by that. You know, maybe we're getting $1 million for that. That's about it. There's no real way to tie a specific piece of content to what it's actually generating in terms of advertising revenue. Also, are you able to value the different types of content on your site and what those are providing you in terms of advertising revenue? So not only a specific individual piece of content, but also the different types of content you might have. So are articles providing more publishing revenue for us than slideshows or for video? If you don't know that right now, that is certainly something that you need to figure out. Obviously, you're going to want to optimize that, so whatever's providing you the most bang for your buck, whatever's giving you the most money, that's what you're going to want to focus your content optimization efforts on. So many of the publishers that we see, they're only looking at their advertising revenue in the aggregate. They're not really even thinking of breaking down their specific content or the specific content types to better understand what is driving that kind of publisher revenue for them, that advertising revenue. This is certainly a blind spot for a lot of publishers. This is something that's important that you can certainly set up for success around this. So let's talk about the solution here. Again, this is going to be a bit Google Analytics focused. In this case, if you are using Google Ad Manager, what you're going to want to do is connect your ad serving platform with your analytics tool. And so with the majority of publishers actually using Google Ad Manager, the only way to do this is going to be through Google Analytics 360. There is no integration on the level of the GA360 Ad Manager integration through other analytics platforms. It's just because of these both being Google products, Google has built this in to where essentially you can mesh advertising metrics with actual on-site Google Analytics behavior. To get into the technical specifics a little bit, the actual Google Publisher tags can interact with the actual Google Analytics tags to unify essentially these data sets and send those into GA. That is just not possible with some of the other analytics platforms out there. So this is a major benefit of having 360, GA360, is that it does integrate natively with Google Ad Manager. And so this first step, we're not going to go through how to connect it. It's pretty easy kind of on the back end, but I want to show you the benefit of actually connecting these tools. So within Google Analytics, you can actually see you're pulling in data from Google Ad Manager into GA. So your reports are going to have impressions, coverage, monetized page views, clicks, click-through rate, and so on, all the way down to publisher revenue. That information is going to be in your Google Analytics. Now, what we can do with that is we can then mesh that up with page URLs that are being collected in GA and saying, okay, for this first line item, here's the homepage. For the homepage, you know, how many impressions are we getting? How many of those are monetized? And then how many clicks and how much ultimately how much revenue are we generating from just that homepage? This will give us that answer. Now the next step from there is, okay, sure, we can see a specific piece of content. So, you know, imagine these are all articles down here. We can see, okay, this article is generating more than this. Why is that? Go through that kind of process. But we can also break out our content into other types or other ways, I should say. So in this case, we're looking at display type, which is, what type of content is it really? You can see article, we have the homepage, slideshow, category index, search results, news index, blog index, author index, etc. Now we can look at these kind of different types of pages on the site and see what those are generating in terms of impressions, clicks, revenue, etc. So any type of custom data information that you're collecting kind of around content in GA can be used to create a custom report then to marry that dimension with these publisher metrics coming from Ad Manager. This will give you those answers that we were looking for. Can we tie specific revenue, publisher revenue, to actual pieces of content and actual types of content on our site? The answer is yes through the integration. And then the last example here is just showing you for content type, showing you, what that revenue is in breakdown here. So all these things we're collecting with either custom dimensions or content groupings with GA. All that's possible as long as you have Ad Manager connected with GA360 and sending in this custom information. We can match all that up and understand, how are our reviews doing against, a how-to article or a news article. So you can see for features, those are actually performing better than reviews in terms of publisher revenue per 1,000 sessions. So we can go through that. If we notice, okay, news analysis is almost $57, that's almost double some of these other ones, or more than double some of these other ones. Maybe we need to do more news and analysis pieces because those are generating a lot more revenue for us. So a lot of optimization possibilities around this, but you need to first get that information by connecting your Ad Manager with your GA360. The last section is, again, interrelated with the previous section we talked about. So the inability to actually deliver targeted advertising. So the first part of that Ad Manager GA360 integration that we talked about was pulling data from Ad Manager into Google Analytics. This case, we're going to actually be sending information from Google Analytics into Google Ad Manager for targeting purposes. So in this case, the way that this works is you can essentially create audiences within Google Analytics that are essentially advanced segments. So it's using data from Google Analytics. In this example we're looking at, we want to target to everybody that has been on the site within the last 7 days. Maybe we call these our recency visitors or something like that. We want to be able to target them for a specific advertiser, or advertisers want to target them for a specific reason. That's possible. We have that information in GA. We can create an audience of these people and then send that over to Ad Manager to sell into the advertisers. Another example here, maybe we have a segment where we consider, or an audience where we consider people that are reading reviews with greater than 10 sessions. Greater than equal to 10 sessions, as these are the people that we want to go after for selling specific products or advertising to them. We can create that audience within GA because we have that information. We have people that are visiting the site, what content they're interacting with. We have all that information. We can create audiences then and share those audiences with Ad Manager as a way to sell that into the publisher's advertisers. So, maybe an easy example would be like Lenovo. Maybe they're looking to reach people that are looking at PC reviews or any of our PC review articles. In those cases, we can create a segment or an audience very easily based on that viewing data that we have in GA, send that over to Ad Manager where they can buy that specific audience and target those users. So pretty powerful stuff. And then it just shows you on the back end, you would link that information with your DFP account, your Ad Manager account, send that audience over, and now within Ad Manager, we can sell that into the advertiser. So pretty cool stuff there. So we have about 10 minutes left. I want to summarize here real quick, and then we'll open up for Q&A if there are any questions. So some of the things we talked about, some of the most common digital analytics issues that publishers are facing. So we talked about inconsistent data quality across properties and brands, the inability to do enterprise level reporting, analytics tools and the sheer expense of having a high traffic organization or high traffic sites, the lack of insight into content's role in generating advertising revenue, and then also the inability to deliver those targeted audiences to advertisers. If your organization is really suffering from any of these issues, not all of them, just any of them, you're really not alone. These are issues that we faced pretty much every single engagement with our publishers. We run into at least one of these, if not multiple versions of these. So definitely don't think you're alone. This is very common in the publishing industry when it comes to analytics. Really wanted to get this out there and let you know, these are issues that we see a lot of the times. We'll give you some examples of how to solve those issues. And if you have any further questions, if you're struggling with these issues and just don't really know where to get started, send me an email. I'm happy to discuss how we can solve those for you, what we can do to kind of alleviate those pain points. And then my email is up here on the last slide, agibson@infotrustllc.com. Any questions, feel free to email me. Our marketing team will send out a copy of this recording along with a copy of the deck, so you have that. But we'll take a couple minutes here to see if there are any questions. But if not, thanks for joining today. Glad to have you, and we'll be following up with you soon. Thanks a lot.